Hi, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of OSACon. Yesterday was fantastic. Thanks for joining us, those of you who were able, and today I'm even more excited about the lineup ahead. As I touched on in the opening remarks, I think there's two major areas of focus and discussion around AI. There's the tools we use and the tools we build, with the latter both embodying and accelerating the open source ethos more than ever. I'm pleased to introduce someone who has a unique perspective on where the tailwind of AI may take us in his talk, Open Source's Massive Unfair Advantage in the AI Era. Someone who knows a thing or two about open source and building tools for people who build on open source. Please welcome me in joining our next keynote speaker, my friend and boss, CEO of Preset, creator of Apache Airflow, VP and creator of Apache Superset, Maxime Beauchemin. Take it away, Max.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So as Evan said, I'm going to be talking about open source massive advantage in the AI era. So yeah, let's get started right away. I've got a lot already, like a quick intro, but just saying a few things about me that I like to say. I love to build data tools. So that's been my passion over the past decade or so. I've been building open source. Huge open source advocate. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why today. And I wanted to say recently, my mind has been very much on agentic coding. So I started to get pretty deep. I mean, we've been coding with AI for years now, starting with some, copy pasting and everything. But the tools got really good this year, and that really accelerated it. A lot of us, me included, and been thinking a lot about agentic coding and context engineering and how to kind of channel and parallelize a lot of the AIs that we have access to, trying to figure out how to burn as many tokens as possible to transform that into software, and preferably open source software that is. It's a bit of a trap. So I think I used this slide before. You submit a talk to a conference a few months, or I submitted a talk a few months ago. I was really thinking about how AI is really going to create even more acceleration and a greater advantage for open source. And I'll talk about some of that today. But I'm going to also use some of the time, if I have time, to promote a bit of a new open source project that I launched yesterday. So I've been so excited about this. I was like, this is what I really want to talk about. So the bulk of the text, it's not a bait and switch in the sense that I'm still going to cover the topic I wanted to cover, but I'll try to talk a little bit about Agor, which is an agent orchestration platform I started yesterday. I'm super excited about. So focus is the title of the talk still. But look forward for a little infomercial for an open source project at the end of the talk. So this talk that I'm giving today is as a companion blog post that I wrote in July. I'm going to touch on the same topics as the blog post, but I'm going to add some colors. I've gathered, as kind of scrambled last night to do some extra analysis and gather some interesting data that helps supports the point that I'm going to make during the talk. So I think it's Mark Andreessen said in 2011, it's kind of cliche by now, but software is eating the world. And at the time, I think we were already well into the digital transformation in terms of like software, everything becoming software, like every company out there having to either become a software company or be crushed by or be eaten by a software company. I've heard different people say, and I've probably been quoted saying that now open source is eating software. And I was trying to get data on that, but I think it's kind of hard to get reliable data as to like how much, say, the percentage of the software that we run today, how much is open source. But intuitively, I think we just know that open source is taking over the world on pretty much just about every layer of the stack. So not only open source is kind of winning in a lot of places top down, but it's also kind of pushing sideways and really taking over software from the inside out too. A point that I'd like to make is that if you look at any piece of proprietary software, which we can't, but if you could look at it, I think what you would realize is that it's merely, you know, a layer of glue code and business logic on top of a large collection of open source packages. So the more I think the software evolves, the more the bits and pieces and the components and the modules and the framework, you know, more of that software is becoming open source. And AI is eating everything. So software is eating the world. Open source is eating software. But then AI will just eat everything. I think the analogy is not as good. That the image is striking, but really, I think what's happening is that AI is going to accelerate open source dominance, and you know, very much an open source maximalist in a lot of ways, and that's just kind of the fate of things. So why is open source taking over the world? I think it's just like fundamentally a better way, right? Like, so that's just a better way to write software. That's a better way to collaborate on software. The thing that matters a lot to me is just the ability to adapt and extend and to integrate. I think that's just massively valuable. It leads to just faster innovation. You know, it's low cost or free. There's just a lot less friction than trying to work with, you know, binaries or proprietary code. And there's just like very strong incentive to contribute. And overall, that leads to like these supernatural network effects, right? So that's a very positive thing. And I think if you think, so the point I want to make is that, you know, I think the marginal cost of software is going down to zero, and that extends in a lot of ways, I think, beyond just software. I think the value or the incremental value of all digital goods with AI is going down to zero. What does that mean for all of us? This is not a philosophical talk, or, you know, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I won't be able to say to get too deep into that. But that's an interesting trend, and open source is largely the vehicle by which the marginal cost of software is going down to zero. And when there's a big shift in a wave coming like this one, I think it makes sense to say if there's a tsunami coming, instead of like trying to fight it or brace down, maybe you just get your surfboard and you ride the trend, right? So I think there's still a lot of value to be created with software. In a sense, software is not done eating the world, and open source is not done eating software. So I think the digital transformation is still underway and getting accelerated. And I would say just embrace it, you know, roll with it, make it, accelerate the train, the trend, move along with the wave. Because if you try to resist this wave, you're gonna get crushed by this massive tsunami. AI is a gigantic catalyst to what's somewhat unevitable here. It's going to accelerate everything. It's going to reduce a lot of friction, and you know, in many ways, just accelerate the progress. And very much believe that that it will kind of play out in that way. Now I'm going to get into like more the specific of like what is like the main fundamental advantage of open source software in the AI era. And it's pretty simple. The models, the foundational models, are fully trained on the code that you work on. So not only the LLMs during their incrementally bigger training runs, or these more and more expensive training runs are happening, they are trained on their code base, which is fantastic. So they retain a lot of information about the piece of software that you're working on, right? So at Preset, we work very actively on Apache Superset, and it's incredible the amount of information that the models retain from training, and they retain knowledge about the code base, about the documentation that's in the open, about specific issues, about conversations that are happening in the open. So these models are voracious, they're super hungry for data, And at every training run, they scan more and more things and retain more and more information. Doing from anecdotal evidence, prompting models, like kind of vibe prompting or vibe assessing the models as to what they know and don't know. They are getting incredibly good at remembering like superset improvement proposals, debates in the community, the structure of various, the architecture or structure of the code base, specific question as to like some of the key models and classes. So what we're seeing is that not only the model retains a lot of information from training, but it builds intuition, and that's getting better over time. And I'll show some more direct evidence of that in just a minute. And if you think about it, if you put that in a position, so say you work on proprietary software at Apache, at Preset, we work on Apache Superset. But if you go and ask any of the models what it knows about the Tableau code base, which is one of our proprietary competitors at Preset, it knows just about nothing. It might know tidbits of like what language it's in, or there might be a paper about a thing or two, but it generally cannot know anything training. Now, brag, maybe I think I'll talk about that in just a minute. But before I do, so yesterday I did something that I've been meaning to do. So I open source a repo this morning. So what I've been meaning to do is to measure how much the various models out there know about Apache Supersets. I created my own Apache Superset knowledge benchmark. That's a set of 20 questions that are, about the code base, the architecture, the history and the culture, the best practices in the repo. So it's a set of like 20 diverse, superset specific code base. And then the process is to test these 20 questions on about a dozen model or so and evaluate how much they know. It's a little bit tricky because there's a cutoff date as of the time of training, right? So I try to write like timeless questions, and the evaluator, who's also an AI, so the evaluator is kind of blindly evaluating the different answers from the various models and scoring it. I try to ask as much as possible timeless questions that are, so that models would not be penalized based on their training cutoff date. If you're interested in it, the link to the repo is here. It's under my personal repo, Superset Bench. It was assembled yesterday, so it's brand new. But the idea is kind of interesting, measuring how much the various models know about the specific piece of software that you're working on every day. And that can inform which model to pick when working with agentic coding tools. So a bit of the results over here. So no surprise, the models are getting better. So here it's sorted by the training cutoff date. And you can look at the percentage, if you go in the older 3.5 turbo. I don't think I have like just a normal 3.5, but the models are getting better at understanding superset. There's some interesting tidbits too, and if you look at the repo, you can read a fuller report. One big thing as to like why the models are doing better now than they were in the past is we put some traps around hallucination questions, or questions that would trigger hallucinations, asking things that are not true about superset, like what is the LLM integration feature? Can you describe how superset integrates with notebooks or LLM, which is not it's not a feature. So the newer models are much better at saying no, I don't know, instead of making stuff up. So that's one thing. So point being, if you work on open source and you catch the training cutoff date, your agent has built intuition. It has knowledge from training, and that knowledge from training gets better and better. And this is an old chart. I was trying to find a newer one, but point being, the training runs are getting much larger. The model architectures is getting better, and like every 3 months, 6 months, when there's a new model, the value that we get over proprietary software, right? Proprietary software is not trained on your code base, but the models are getting better and better, and that is value, and that enables us working on open source to have companion models that are fully trained on the code base that they work on with us. So point being, I wanted to make the point that training is so much better than RAG. So if you work on a piece of non-open source software like Tableau, you can still fire up Cloud Code, Codex, Gemini into your repo. And the agentic tools have been getting really good at, just fetching the context, right? So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So that means that your agent now, if you're operating in proprietary code base, can still has access to the code base, right? And it can still go and fetch it. But the point I want to make, and I don't have direct evidence or a paper to show, but point being that knowledge accumulated during training is like true knowledge, right? So the models will be able to like deeply in the neural net understand the patterns and have some really clear intuition. RAG, on the other hand, is very much like short-term memory, right? So yes, if you're working on proprietary code, the agents can fetch the context and feed it to the model, but that type of knowledge and that type of operation is nothing like the intuition that you get from training. What does that inform? That means that informs working on open source and making sure to put all your code out there to catch the next training run, because the next training run is probably starting as we speak, and that might be a $500 million training run. So you really want for your latest code to be somehow picked into the neural net. The proprietary software is flying blind in a way. I mean, it's not completely blind because the agent can retrieve, it can do RAG, but the closed code is invisible. The fine tuning cannot really catch up. So people, I think, originally thought that you might be able to take an open source model or an open weight model and do fine tuning. I think that has proven to be, expensive, difficult, and kind of a garbage approach. Or like I have not read people or I haven't seen reported people doing that successfully or recommending to do that. It's difficult, takes time, it's expensive, it's error prone. And then when you fine tune on top of a model with like too much information, you kind of scramble its thought. It's just the model just woke up and was like, it's like trying to study for a math exam, an hour before the exam. It just doesn't work as well. But yeah, so you're kind of locked out of training set. So if you work on proprietary code, you don't get all of this value that comes from training time. So yeah, so there's a compound advantage where there are some virtual cycles and feedback loops, right? So because, so say if you work on a piece of software like Apache Superset or whatever piece of open source software you're working on, then when it comes time to write code, your success with the various LLM that you work with, if they're fully trained on the software, is going to be greater, which allows you to contribute better code, which allows for the software to get better, the open source adoption to go up, more contributors to come, and for these new contributors to be helped by the best models that have full context about the software. So that is the big kind of element, I think, of this talk is like the open source wins because of the feedback and the networks effect that are fueled by the training runs, learning about the software deeply and deeper at every run. So that's the talk. I said I was going to use some time to show an open source project that I started yesterday. So I'll do a bit of a tour of it. I know you signed up for a different talk. So if you want to, you're not interested in the topic, you can move on, but I think you should be interested in this topic. So yesterday I launched something called Agor. And Agor is an agent orchestrator. Here's the repo. It's on the preset org repo. But I'll do a quick, not demo of it, but a quick walkthrough. The problem that Agor solves is allowing people to run a lot of models all at once, right? So now that we can work with AI and AIs and they're coding very quickly, parallelizing your work becomes super important. So all of a sudden, instead of working on a feature at a time and switching from branch to branch, you're able to work on 5, 6, 10 features at the same time. And Agor is designed to allow you to orchestrate more agents and do all sorts of things. The real differentiators, and this is like my live instance of like Agor, working on Agor. The real kind of interesting thing here is that it has a spatial layout, right? So you're able here to, these are all AI sessions over here that are represented as cards. Here I have a Kanban type workflow, where you can create these boxes that says, what is in progress, done, currently coding. So you organize your board however you want. And for any of these boards, you can create these AI sessions. I'll talk a little bit about the architecture and how it works behind the scene, but one thing that's important is this notion of work trees. So if you have not heard about Git work trees, it's just like it's a Git core features that allows you to check out multiple branch at the same time, right? So normally a Git repo is only, as one file system snapshot. With Git work trees, the same repository can have multiple checked out branch at the same time. So you can have different agents working on different things. You can have different version of your app working at the same time. So in Agor, so I'm in the settings for Agor, you get boards, so you can create as many boards as you want. Then you register your repository. So here I do have the Agor repository. I can add the Superset repository, or whatever repository you work on. Then you got these work trees, right? So these represent more or less the projects that you would work on. You register your MCP servers, so you can register them at the Agor level, and then you can use them in the various sessions. You get your API keys. You can manage users because it is multiplayer. And here's the about screen with the crazy TS particle integration. So you get a board, you set up kind of your workflow. Agor manages your work trees, right? That are kind of your project, and these work trees land on a board that you can organize yourself. Now what I'm going to show is that you can create as many AI sessions as you want. So when you create a new session, you get the choice between Cloud Code, Codex, Gemini. I'm looking to integrate, I think one is called Open Code. That's an open source one. So here, these are not, I think Gemini, the CLI, is a part of it is open source. Part of these are open source. But there are now some agentic coding tools that are open source. So there's more to come. And here, you can fire up a session. So you can just say hello. Normally, you might reference a GitHub issue or something like that, and get the work going. So now, while this agent is working in parallel, I can go, shuffle across my various sessions and basically like spin a lot of plates at the same time, right? So then you can go and work on multiple projects all at once. I'll show this little feature too around environment. So every work tree, if it's configured to do so, can have its own environment, right? So this is, if I pop open this is, now it's meta because I'm working on Agor with Agor, but this should load the loading page. Well, maybe this branch is not working. So the demo gods are with us, but you can look at the logs to see what's happening over here. But yeah, so every card can have an associated environment. So here I can stop my environment. So that would allow you to validate the work of the agent in the app all at once. You get a little fancy terminal here too, so that you're able to introspect things. You can definitely log into the box too. Here I'm working local, so I can have my own terminal, but it can be convenient to have a little terminal over here. And there's just much more features, super feature rich. You get, to prompt the agent, you get a lot of metadata that you might not get otherwise. You can really control the settings here, like what is my permission mode, which model I want to use, and all sorts of other goodness here. I'll talk about another feature or two that I think are interesting. So one is, I'm not writing a very complicated prompt here, but you can prompt any session, but you can also spawn sessions and fork sessions. So that allows you to manage your context window a little bit better. That's a pretty powerful feature. And the last feature I'm going to talk about is around the zones. So these zones, I can go and I'm going to have to move my screen a little bit just because it's off screen. But you can go and create these zones, arbitrary zone, so you can use them linearly like a Kanban, or organize them however you want. But the thing that's interesting is not the color switch here, is this idea of zone triggers. So any zone can have a prompt associated with it. And these prompts are templated. So if there's a GitHub issue attached to my work tree, I can reference it as a template in here. But here I'm just going to say something very simple, like say hello. And then if I take this card over here and move it in, it will prompt say hello, and it would process the template here. So again, you can pick the model you want to use, and you can decide to create a new session, reuse a session. So some pretty sweet features. And then I'll do a last one that I think is interesting. So Agor has its own internal MCP server. So that means agents operating within Agor can talk with the Agor system through its MCP. So I'm going to say, hey, can you tell me what tools the Agor MCP server exposes? TLDR, please. Because, these models are kind of chatty. And I'm going to say I want to bypass permission because I don't want to get nagged by permission requests. So here, the agent itself is connected to the Agor MCP, and that enables the agents to operate within Agor. So it can list the other session, it can list the boards, it can create, so it can do CRUD operations within Agor. And the crazy kind of meta level thing is that one agent can look at the work of another agent, so act as a supervisor, or the agent is able to trigger a prompt in a remote session in a different agent. So you can kind of imagine these crazy workflow and these runaway agent, where an agent might say like, oh, okay, I found these 5 new GitHub issues. Now I'm going to create 5 work trees and prompt 5 agents to start doing some work. So I just got to be careful with runaway agents there with domino effects or nuclear reaction or chain reactions here, where like too many agents create too many agents. So we might have to implement some sort of policy. But that is Agor in a nutshell. It's my passion. I launched it yesterday. I'm using it actively to build the features in this product. We're starting to use it as a team in Apache Superset. Oh yeah, one last thing I've not mentioned as I get 5 minutes before the end of my talk here. So there is a lot of social features in here. It's a little bit like Figma. So in many ways, you might recognize like just a 2D, so very Figma-esque, right? Inspired, right? But you do have these threads, and it is fully real time. So if you bring in a friend, you bring your team, you would see their cursors move on the streams on the screen, because we are using Socket for just about everything. So it's very real time, very social if you decide to make it, and that is essentially it. So these include spatial comments. So if I put a comment onto a zone here, and we can see that the comment is attached to the zone, right? So it moves along with it. Or I could put a comment more directly on a work tree here, and you can see how the comment lives here. So social, very easy, or allows you to stay sane if you've been doing like me and trying to manage like 5 to 10 agents working on 5 or 10 different projects at the same time, which is what you should do, I think, as a software engineer in this era, or even as a data engineer, an analytics engineer. I think you want to be coordinating as many agents as possible while structuring your things in your heads so that you don't get crazy from trying to manage too much all at once. But Agor provides a structure to make it easier for you and your team to collaborate and organize all of your AI sessions. So that's what I got on my side. I'll return to StreamYard, which you could probably unshare my screen because we're going to get this Star Wars effect. But I wanted to wrap up by saying that I will go on to AirMeet next, and I'll be there to answer questions. So if you want to talk about how open source will take over the world, or is taking over the world, or has taken over the world, super happy to talk about that. And if you're also an agentic coding tool enthusiast, you want to talk about Agor, it's kind of hard to get me to shut up about it these days because it just launched. I'm really excited. So that's what I got. Thank you. And I'll see some of you, although I think Heather is speaking next in 3 minutes. She is the authority on everything software license, legal, open source related. So you might not want to miss that and come chat with me some other way. You can reach out to me. I'm Mr. Crunch on Twitter, Mr. Crunch on GitHub, and Superset Slack is probably where you would find me.
Posted the link to the Agor repo for anybody that wants to check it out. And Max, maybe we have time for one question. I'll kind of lump them together a little bit, and you can choose which one you like. One is about in Agor, if there are any chances to do parallel execution between models or any kind of smart router that will pick the right model for your task. The other question is about the LLMs understanding and training on open source software. Are there problems with losing intellectual property, annotations? And does that open security holes, since it probably knows your software well enough to know what the weak spots are? And
yeah, that's a super interesting one. By the way, I recently, while I was working on Agor, I'm launching it, and I said, and it speaks to the first question. So I created, so that was a read-only operation. So inside my Agor session, I just created a Codex, Gemini, and Claude Code session in parallel. And I said, can you do a full audit of this, do a security report? So basically, like, analyze deeply the repo, go and find if there's some security issues. And Gemini and Claude did it. They're like, okay, sure, I'm going to go produce a great and awesome security report in parallel. But Codex refused. It was like, I am not allowed to do this, because they thought I might use the report, for a gray hat, black hat, that kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting. But I think transparency is the best thing for security. Like, security bought through opacity is not true security. So for me, I'm bullish on saying, like, put your code, the code that is open source is, as I think, has been studied, or it's been evaluated to be more secure than code that is not open source. Like this, just the sunshine, kills the bacteria in some ways, right? So casting light on things make things better. Another thing that I wanted to say about parallelizing work on Agor, so it's really easy to make competitions for a task. So if you don't want them to operate on the same work tree because they're going to step on each other's feet, right? That you can't really, I would not suggest using agents on the same file system, but you can create 3 work trees in parallel. So say create feature A, Codex, feature A, Cloud Code. So you create 3 work trees, and then you create 3 sessions on each one of them, and you can have them race, so you can have the features built 3 times. You can hit that play button to fire up 3 environments to validate that they work. And the last thing I'm going to say is that you can ask Agor to coordinate all of this. So you can ask an agent to say, can you create 3 work trees? Can you create 3 sessions? and can you get that going? And one agent can orchestrate the other agents. There's a scheduler in there too, which is pretty cool. So you could do that on a schedule. We're at time. I can't hear you. Are you? Yeah, you got it.
Lots more questions unanswered, but I want to get into them too. So come join us at the tables. Thank you, Max, and everybody enjoy OSACon. And thank you, Heather, in advance.
Thank you.
Take care.